Welcome to Find, Tell, Share, the Storytellers podcast. I'm Chris Sissons and my business is Market Together. I started this podcast because I use stories to help businesses with their marketing, their business development, and for finding the real work that only you can do. And the co-host for this podcast is...
Hi, I'm Jemma Rosenthal and my business is Creative Hearts, and I'm a voice coach. I write songs, do poems, act a bit. So I basically do anything creative and I help people to find their voices. So on today's podcast, we always talk about everything storytelling. Chris will be introducing our lovely guest today in a bit, and later on I will be sharing a poem and Chris will be sharing a story.
Thank you, Jenna, and this time I'm delighted to introduce our guest Siobhan Moss, who is a self-connection coach and journal therapist. Her mission is to help women heal through the power of words. She holds space for them to transmute their trauma into light and guides them to show up in the world expressing their innate divinity. She's also the founder of the newly established Women's Wellbeing Network. Today, she will be sharing more about her journey from lack to love and how the power of words aided her in overcoming addiction and trauma and led to a greater sense of connection to herself and others. So welcome, Siobhan.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here, Siobhan. And I can certainly remember you did my Telling Stories, Making Business storytelling. Must be 2 or 3 years ago now.
I did, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was a wonderful experience, actually. Just helping me to just get clear on the story and everything, and the feedback within the session was really great.
Yeah, yes, it's one of the sessions that I remember as particularly because we made some real progress with that story, didn't we? I'm reluctant to follow that up in case it's going to appear in the story you're going to tell in a few minutes. So how have you been experiencing lockdown? Has it been difficult or has it been a liberation?
It's been a bit of both, I'd say, because I am a single mom as well. So I've had my child at home the whole time. So the homeschooling has been a new venture and an adventure as well. It's been quite fun and we've managed to get out and do lots as well, lots of walks. But it has been overwhelming at times too. So there's been a bit of both in there.
Yes. And presumably bringing up a child is one of the things that helps you keep it all together. Has there been anything else? What do you do in those rare moments when you're on your own that helps you keep going?
Wow. Well, like some people say, I live for the weekend. It's like I really appreciate that time when my son does go to his dad's some weekends, and I think sometimes just sitting down and hearing my own thoughts is like such a blessing. Lighting a candle and saying a prayer and just being able to really have that time to connect to myself. And then also sometimes in the evening, putting a film on and, just enjoying that freedom to just express myself and relax and unwind. That's really precious to me as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how do you find? Did you find the time to be creative in there as well?
Definitely, yeah. So I find that I'm more creative in the morning. It's that's when I feel more in flow and have like the natural ability to create. And I tend to do my writing in the morning. So it could be poetry or it could be journaling, whatever it feels like it needs to be in the morning. And that's generally, I use that time for creation. So, yeah. And then during the day, I just found myself bursting out in song or just singing and dancing through it, doing the pots or whatever. So, yeah.
Yes, I think I had to hold back on the dancing while I'm doing the pots these days.
I was doing it yesterday while I was doing the pots. I was listening to In the Heights, the musical, because I'm doing some choreography for a class I teach dancing for, and it was just so much fun. I just found so much joy just with the rhythms. I don't know if you've heard of the musical, but they're doing a film soon, and it's just such good music, and I just love dancing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I've often got tunes going through my head, and yeah. Well, nobody's ever caught me dancing.
I actually have, Chris. That's a lie, because you danced. You danced on one of our me and manifestation maven Suma Mangra, who we have another podcast on if you want to check out that. But we did a music and manifestation workshop, and I swear you were dancing on it, because we've got the recording.
Yeah, well that was enforced dancing. It wasn't spontaneous dancing.
Yes, but you enjoyed it, obviously.
Oh yeah, I must have done. I wiped it completely out of my memory.
Yeah, but it means you can do it, so you definitely can do it.
I didn't say I didn't. I didn't say I couldn't do it. I just said nobody's ever caught me.
Yes, but I have.
Yeah. I've I mean, Siobhan, one of the initiatives you set up a few years ago was called the Connection Cafe, which ceased to connect when we weren't allowed in cafes anymore. But I've noticed you're now styled as a connection coach or self-connection coach. So what does that word connection, it's obviously a meaningful word for you. What does it actually mean?
It is. So to me, connection is the common thread between us as human beings. It's the thing that brings us together. And for me, it's a symbol of unity, that we are all connected, we are all one. And living a life sometimes very disconnected from myself, I felt the pain and the void of not having connection in my life, and that led me down a whole different path. And I think it was important for me at that time in my life when I set up Connection Cafe to bring connection to the forefront of my life, and also to offer that up for others to experience as a way of creating bonds and healing together, and having a space where they could feel part of something bigger than themselves, and just have that common thread with other humans. I think that is so important for well-being and for mental health and just for human existence, really. I think we're animals that are supposed to live in tribes, and we work better together as humans. So I think connection is a big part of being human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. I suppose there's an element of that in the title for my business as well, Market Together. Because marketing is seen as being about competition, isn't it? You've got to market your business and get ahead of everybody else and all. Whereas, in fact, there's a lot of mutual benefit in helping one another with our marketing, and that's just one human activity amongst many. And again, the very act of coaching, which we all do, is about reaching out and helping other people.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you and gratitude to Siobhan, who connected me and Chris together, because that's how we met, through Connection Cafe.
We did. Yeah,
so this has all come about because of you, Siobhan, and what your intention, your intention to connect others together has led on, not for me as well, not just with Chris, but also with Sisters with One Voice as well, which I met through meeting through you, so, and so many other people as well. So it's just to give you gratitude, but also to recognise the importance of connection and how it can really uplift someone's life in ways that you wouldn't even imagine, because it's bringing opportunities and people together that need each other and can support each other. And just as Chris was saying, when we help each other out with our businesses, instead of being in competition, we're in collaboration, which all of us are about anyway. And it just feels so much better. It just feels lighter, much more fun, and everyone's helping each other out. And yeah, I think that's what life's about, isn't it? It's about coming to earth and having this earthly experience, but not doing it alone. It's about having that joy in life and sharing that with others.
Well, I'm sure these themes are going to come up again later in the podcast. I think maybe this is the point at which it would be good to hear Siobhan's story. So I should just launch straight into it.
Okay. So I just wanted to say, last year I was involved in a collaboration in telling my story in a book. So I have that book with me right now. It's called Love Thy Body, Real Life Stories, Volume 1. And my chapter in this, I will be referring back to it as I tell my story and just give you little snippets, just to summarise and sum up what I was feeling in those moments. I'd just like to share that with you as well. I think starting with childhood then, one thing that really stands out to me is the way that I would write poetry and I would write as a child. That was for me a coping mechanism and a healing tool, although at the time I didn't recognise it as that. It was just a way for me to express things that were going on in my life that I wasn't comfortable talking about or didn't really know how to express it. So as a child, I had quite a confusing childhood where half of my life was with my grandparents, and I lived with my grandparents and was brought up by them. And they provided me with a very stable and loving home. And it was like a family hub, and I always felt safe there. The door was always open to, family members coming and going, and there was a real sense of like community and connection within that family home. And I felt safe there. And all my happiest childhood memories happened with my grandparents. And then there was a flip side to my childhood where I spent time living with my mum. Now, my mum had what I think was undiagnosed mental health issues. And when I was with my mum, I never felt safe. I felt very vulnerable. And there was a lot of abuse that went on in that home. So I spent a lot of my childhood in fear and feeling very small. One of the things I used to do was make myself very small and very quiet as not to arouse my mother's anger. And, I just used to be really small and make my voice small and make it so I wasn't really heard within the home. But what I would do is I would write. So I would write about, just poems about how I was feeling or the things that I imagined in the future for the life that I wanted to live. There was like a lot of dreamy themes in there. So it was about, oh, when I grow up, I want to live by the sea and, or fly to different countries. And there was like lots of like dreaminess in there. And there was just lots of creation at that point in my life. And I think there is that saying, isn't there? Poets need the pain. And I think as a child, I didn't really understand any of that. But, I was feeling all this turbulence inside. And that transpired into beautiful works of art that I didn't even realise. And I remember as a child getting called back after class one day. I was about 10 or 11 by my teacher. And he said, Siobhan, you've got a gift with words. And I didn't understand that at the time. I was like, what do you mean I've got a gift with words? What does that even mean? But I think what he meant by that was I had the ability to sum up how I was feeling, and with that, reach out and connect with others through the way that I worded it. I put it into a way that maybe felt accessible to somebody else that might also be going through those feelings and those emotions, and they could connect and relate to me through my writing. So I began writing a lot more as a teenager, and that again was a coping mechanism. So the abuse continued with my mum, and when I got to an age where I could numb out what was happening, that's what I started to do. So it started as getting drunk in the park, as I think a lot of teenagers used to do at that time. We'd go down to the park and buy a bottle of cider on a Friday night, and it started like that. And it got to a point where, as a teenager, I'd get into very vulnerable positions. I put myself in places that weren't very safe. And because I didn't have a great deal of self-worth or self-esteem, I used to think that that's what I deserved when I put myself in those positions. I didn't have any sense of things being wrong, because I think I'd seen that growing up, and I'd seen my mother's addictions, and I saw just the way my life was as a child. That kind of all felt normal to me. So I'd go into situations that weren't safe for me, but I'd feel that I knew that situation because I'd seen it before, I'd seen it in the past. So I wasn't scared, I wasn't nervous, because it was what I'd known. So I'd put myself in really vulnerable situations. And I think writing for me was an escape from that. But as I continued with my drinking and taking drugs at this point, I kind of started to lose the connection that I had to myself and the ability to write. So I guess it fell out of my priorities to write. And I kind of just went into the world of numbing and blocking out what was there in my childhood, in my past. And it also brought me a new sense of confidence that I'd never felt before, as a child, and in my home where I had to make myself feel small. I'd not experienced that level of freedom and confidence that I did experience when I was drinking. So for me, it felt safe, and it felt like a new world that I wanted to discover. And writing, sadly, dropped down my list of priorities. I also remember the way I felt about my body as well at the time. I was very slim, and I felt that I'd made myself that way through trying to be smaller, trying to... in my home, I felt like I was being too much of something that I wanted to contract and make myself smaller. So I don't think I looked after myself properly, and I was very underweight. And, you know, people used to say, oh, I wish that I looked like you, or I wish that I was slimmer. But for me, it was a trauma response. It was a way of making myself smaller. And I was quite fragile emotionally and physically. And then what I found was I didn't really reach an equilibrium with my body, with my weight or anything, because what came next was being overweight. And then, and that was from, you know, drinking alcohol and eating takeaways all the time, just living an unhealthy lifestyle. And then I think that was playing out the feelings of being too little and not enough, you know, not being pretty enough, not being wanted enough, not being feminine enough, not being worthy enough. So I felt like I was trying to fill a void with food. So food became an addiction to me. Bad food, takeaways, comfort food, and also the drugs and alcohol that, you know, escalated as well. So I got to a point where I was dependent on those things to give me a sense of self. And actually I'd lost connection to myself completely, and I was relying on other things to fill a void that I was feeling within. And I put myself in some awful positions at that point. I'd woken up in stairwells at the side of the road, woken up in my own vomit, with injuries, with cracked ribs, and not even known how that happened. And I was at a point where I was living in a one-bedroom flat on my own, and just remembering that feeling of waking up in the morning, feeling like I might die that day, because I'd, you know, overdone it the night before, and thinking, I don't want to be on my own. I don't want to die on my own. And it really got to that point where this loneliness, this feeling of loneliness just was seeping into my life. And I would cry myself to sleep most nights. I just really felt this longing and this void that needed filling. And just a snippet from the book, I put, I'll cry myself to sleep every night from loneliness. I'll go out and drink and take drugs as a way to feel a sense of connection. But the mornings after, there was only silence and depletion, feeling like I would die and die alone. And that was probably the loneliest point of my life, I feel. Just the chasing the connection, but doing it through drink and drugs, and feeling that brought me closer to people when I was doing that and engaging with people at that point. But at the end of the night, you know, I'd go home and then I'd wake up on my own, and I just feel this sense of purposelessness and loneliness. And I think at that point, my health really started to deteriorate. So I was getting really bloated. I'd have really bad abdominal cramps. My skin was really bad. I suffered really badly from acne. And I started bleeding in between periods at that point as well. So I did go to the doctors, and they diagnosed me with polycystic ovaries. And that, for me, at that point, it felt like a wake-up call. It felt like I need to do something about what's going on in my life, because I know I'm not going to be alive much longer if I continue down this path. So at that point in time, I decided to cut down using alcohol and address it, because I knew deep within me that's what was causing these health problems. But I didn't really understand at that point that it was what was underneath that was causing me to want to drink, the disconnection. So it was a long kind of journey. It took me 18 months just to be able to get to a point where I could actually walk away from alcohol. But at that point, this 18 months was a whole journey in itself of cutting down, and then there was the things that were going on in my life and around me at the time where they could have really pushed me back into addiction. And it was around addiction itself. It was around my mother's addiction and how that escalated to a point where she was suffering from psychosis, and I had to take on the care of a younger sibling. And that was really difficult because he was 11 at the time, and he had to come and live with me. And also at the time, I just found out that I was pregnant. So that for me was a blessing, but I couldn't celebrate that at that point in my life because of all the additional stuff that was going on around me. And then at 6 months pregnant, I was made homeless by my landlord who needed his house back. So me and my brother and my bump had to go into homeless accommodation. And it was such a difficult point of my life. All I wanted was to have a place to call home and to nest and to bring my baby home to. All I wanted was the support of a mother or a partner, just anyone. I felt all alone in what I was experiencing. And despite it all, there were moments where I would just cradle my bump and swear to my child that everything would be all right. And I think there was just this, it felt like there was darkness everywhere, but there was just this ray of light shining through it all, telling me that everything would be okay. And there was a deeper purpose, there was a deeper meaning to everything that was going on in my life, all of the chaos. When it came to my birth and giving birth to my son, I suffered from a very difficult birth, and I had a trauma that was a traumatic event in my life, giving birth to my son, and it ended up in an emergency C-section. And also I struggled to produce milk and couldn't breastfeed, and that for me at the time felt crippling. That was it felt devastating. Like I couldn't do what came naturally to most mothers. I couldn't, look after my son. I couldn't even look after myself properly, and I just felt so much shame around that. Plus also adapting to this new body that I had after, being a mum and giving birth and having stretch marks and all new lumps and bumps and a scar. It was, there was a lot going on for me just around that, that challenge of being a mum and being a carer. And yeah, I think in the book I put, looking back at the photos from this period, my heart aches for that young woman who didn't realise the magnitude of all she'd been through. The smile on her face, trying to disguise the sadness in her eyes. She was the woman on the brink of breakdown. So that's what happened eventually after going through all that trauma at that point. And that year, it just really felt like I'd lost everything. It had gone from me living a comfortable life where I was living in, you know, a rented apartment, and I had a partner, I had a job. I was coming home drinking 2 bottles of wine every night, but, you know, I was trying to cut that down and just having a comfortable life, to being dealt this hand where I had to take on the care of my brother. I had to deal with my mother's mental health at the time. And, you know, she was delusional, and she was trying to break into my flat, and she was putting out death threats, and it was really scary. My relationship breakdown, and then being made homeless, and the birth trauma, I think all that happened in the space of, you know, just a few months, and just trying to hold it all together and deal with this newborn baby and everything. That was, you know, it was going to push me over the edge, I think. So that's kind of what happened. But before I got to that point, it was my son's christening day that I made the decision to go completely sober. So I'd weaned myself off over that 18-month period, enough for me to put down my glass on the bar and then walk past it on the way out. And that was, it feels like one of the biggest moments in my life, putting down that glass on the bar and having the staying power and the confidence in my own soul to walk past it, just because I wanted to offer my son a better life than what I experienced as a child. And those moments of trying to wake my mum up on the sofa when, you know, she was completely out of it and thinking that she was dead. You know, as a child, I didn't want that. I didn't want to pass that on to my child. So that, for me, overcoming that addiction was probably the most freeing thing that I've ever done for myself. And I'll always remember that moment. And it took 7 months. There was like a 7-month period between me stopping drinking and then for my breakdown to happen. So I feel that the alcohol, the drinking, was the crutch that I'd been using to block out and numb and cope with all my trauma that had helped me up until that point. But then once I removed that from the equation, it was like I opened up space to release all my trauma. And then that's when, so I'll just read a little bit about what happened. Because for me, it was a very spiritual thing, what happened. And I knew it was happening for me. But at the time, I was very scared. You know, I didn't know what was happening, but it really was a freeing experience. It was releasing me from my past. So I put, it happened one Sunday morning after joining a meditation and breathwork session. Partway into the session, I experienced an altered state of consciousness, and despite best efforts to ground myself, I couldn't control what was happening to me. Physically, my nervous system went into overload. Energetically, I went into complete meltdown. I was met with feelings and sensations that I'd never experienced, and what felt like electricity surging through my body. Emotionally, I was a nervous wreck. The levels of anxiety I was experiencing caused me to physically shake. It felt unbearable, like a human body was not built to contain this level of feeling and activity. The not knowing or understanding what was happening to me perpetuating the anxiety. But at the same time, there was a deep knowing that this was something profoundly spiritual that was transforming me in a way that I didn't understand. And this was the start of months of intense physical and emotional purging that paved the way for deep healing and the laying of the foundations of my self-connection journey. So, yeah, I think at that point, it was like, that was the turning point in my life. I think it was like someone had flicked a switch and then the electricity had connected and I was lit up, like physically and spiritually and mentally and in every way. And it was really difficult because I had to find new ways of coping with and dealing with what was going on. So I became very sensitive to everything, to light, to noise, to sounds, to smells, and everything felt brand new. It kind of felt like I was a newborn baby or something, and I had to learn to live in this world again. So, yeah, all the sensations were heightened and to a point where it was almost painful, and I didn't really know like how to deal with it. So what I would do is I'd have to check in with my body every day and just really go back to basics and just check in with myself and see what I needed to get through the day. You know, do I need more water? Do I need to eat a nutritious, nourishing meal? And that kind of, and it really was just going back to basics. And the other thing that really helped me to connect back to myself was writing. So that was the time that I rediscovered writing. So after this happening to me and not really knowing what was going on, and after having all this anxiety and not knowing what to do with it, I remember just sitting down one day with a pen and paper and just using it as an outlet. I had to do it. It felt like I had so much bursting out of me that I had to find an outlet, and it just seemed so natural. It seemed to come naturally when I picked up a pen and paper and I just began to write, and the words began to flow. And what I noticed was a lot of the stuff I was writing, it was quite dark. It was quite, trauma based. But what I realized is I was releasing and I was healing through doing this. It was allowing me to complete the experience of what I'd been holding on to, the trauma that was like lodged in my body or whatever. It was allowing me to like tap back into it and complete the cycle of healing within that trauma in order to release it. And that's what I began to do. So I began to write a lot, and little by little, I felt lighter. I felt like I was letting go. I felt freer. And I think I began to heal at that point, in combination with the checking in with myself and my needs and bringing my attention and awareness to my body and what it needed to be strong and healthy. And then with the emotional healing and the writing, it felt like as a whole being, I was beginning to heal. And it felt really good. For the first time in my life, I was discovering what it means to love myself and to connect with myself and hear and feel and see. And it felt like I'd awoken. But then within that period, a few months after that, I received a phone call one day, and nothing could prepare me for that phone call. So I'll just read from the book what I wrote on that. So whilst in this period of deep transformation, I received a phone call one day. Nothing could prepare me for the shocking and sickening news I was about to receive. I learnt that my mother had been arrested and charged with murder. She had been so deeply disconnected from herself that she had taken someone's life in horrific circumstances. Maybe the saddest thing about it was that I wasn't shocked. I wasn't shocked, but I felt numb. Then I felt a deep sorrow, sorrow that someone I loved so much had allowed her darkness to swallow her whole. I always hoped that she would have got help for her inability to cope with her own emotions, for her violent rage, for her addictions. Instead, they consumed her. She was sentenced to life in prison. At this point, I made the decision to dedicate myself to love, to choose only love, to heal myself in order to be of service to others and help them overcome the disconnection they feel in their lives, to help them to understand their wounds and know their darkness, to help them stem the bleed so that they don't bleed on the ones that didn't cut them, to help them heal and go on to live the lives that they truly deserve, to have fulfilling and nourishing relationships with both themselves and others, to help them reunite with their core essence, their innate divinity and the truth of who they really are, love itself. Because that's what I believe. I believe that, deep down, we are all love, and we choose what we want in life by either feeding our light or feeding our darkness. And I fed my darkness in the first part of my life because that's all I knew. And then eventually I made that decision to feed my light and to bring awareness and lightness into my life and allow that for myself. And I think that's where connection is really important, because when we're disconnected from ourselves and from others, that's where addictions can surface, because we're trying to fill a void. We're trying to reach something that doesn't feel attainable, and then we fill it with what's there, what's there to block out pain, or we create a way to feel full, even though it's not nourishing. And that for me was about it was seeing other people's addictions and then allowing that into my own life, because that's all I knew. But at the same time, there was that deeper knowing that, I am love inside, and I want to nourish that. And I think that's all any of us really truly want to do. And I think when we're seen by other people, and when we're truly seen and truly heard, and we have that connection, it validates us as human beings, and I think when we can connect with ourselves and give ourselves that validation, then we can readily give it out to others and, have those shared experiences that we all crave. But I think first of all, we need to make that choice whether, we want to choose love. And, I continued with my healing journey. I'm still continuing with my healing journey now. But I just think it's a choice that I make every day. I have to make that choice every day to choose love, to choose lightness, to choose growth. And it's not always the easy option. I think it's painful. It's confrontational at times. We have to confront things that we'd rather block out. But when we make that choice, we're in control then, and we can always come back to love. And I just think when we choose love, we just open up a whole new world for ourselves. So and that's how I have navigated my healing journey. And I really do think that the power of words helped me to connect with myself in order to connect with others and bring other people together to heal and, you know, to search for their own light and their own divinity, and just to be, you know, a community and do this together rather than one person struggling against the world and dealing with, you know, their addiction and feeling lost and feeling a void and a lack of connection. I really believe that as humans, we're here to help each other and just to reunite with that oneness, you know, that, you know, we are all one, and we're here to do this together. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, it's an immense story. It's yes, yeah. The thing that struck me listening to the story, and it's a topic that's been on my mind over the last 24 hours or so, is the role of birth in the story, and that to me, you know, this is actually a story. Well, I suppose it's a story of two halves, but I think the point of the story is that journey of rebirth.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's where and possibly that's where the focus needs to be. I mean, clearly, all the trauma and the addictions and everything is the common ground with people who are on that ground, but the story they need to hear is the story of rebirth, and that it is actually possible.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why I tell the story that I do, just to illustrate that you don't have to stay stuck in that place. You know, you do have that choice to choose love, and I think that's for me where that rebirth came in. You know, it was choosing a better life for my son. I didn't want him to see what I went through, so it was that choosing love and nourishment for him, but then ultimately for myself, you know.
But I mean, I don't know whether it's possible to begin the story with his birth, but I think that seemed to me to be significant.
Yeah.
And it's significant in the sense that it's common, with at least sort of 50%-ish of humanity. And it's also something that, in a way, you don't have control over. And it controls you. But then there was another birth on the christening day.
Yeah.
When you gave up the alcohol. And I think the interesting thing about that is the 7 months between giving up the alcohol and having the what did you call it?
For me, it was spiritual crisis or
awakening,
for me, awakening. Yeah.
And that 7 months is the gestation period. You made a decision, which in a way, you know, was leaving the glass on the bar, which is a lovely image, and walking past the glass on the bar. That was the decision, but it actually took 7 months then. Yeah, and again, I think it's like the birth of the pregnancy in the sense you can't say, oh, I'm going to have the spiritual awakening in 7 months' time and set the clock ticking. It doesn't work like that. You didn't know when you walked past the glass that it was going to be 7 months, and you didn't.
I didn't know it was coming at all.
Well, exactly. So again, you've got that sense of something growing within that you're not aware of until it bursts out. And then the third point, I think, was a little bit different, but maybe, and that was the phone call when you heard about your mother being arrested. And that sort of triggered the outreach dimension. You'd sort of connected yourself. You'd done the sort of self-connection, but then you realised there was more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you can't just stop there.
Yeah,
and I think that one. I mean, clearly there could have. You could say yes, there was a gestation period for that as well, between the self-awareness and the mother's phone call. But I think also that phone call triggered it in a way. So again, it wasn't you who triggered it particularly, but it got pushed along, and I think that's one of the things that connection and togetherness and so on does. It can speed up the gestation periods for the life changes and the art and so on. So that's my immediate thought. I'm sure Gemma's got an immediate thought as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there, and I really liked the birth part as well. So the bit where you said you cradled your bump and you swore that everything was going to be all right. I mean, I was in tears because obviously, knowing you, knowing your son, and it's like, I mean, even if I didn't, I think I would have been moved in that moment, because it's like that. It becomes about something greater than yourself. And I know you mentioned that before at the beginning, which again, to point Chris's point, it's like, well, just to kind of add to that as well, it's almost like when you witness the darkness go so wrong, of like, oh my gosh, how can this happen? All these traumatic experiences. It's almost as if you use that to then make a choice, make a firm choice. I'm going to choose love. I'm going to choose to help others to choose love. And it's almost as if some people never get to that point because they're just in the numbing phase for so long, and yet you were able to take yourself out of that numbing phase, and then when it arose and there was what happened with your mum, it made you have to confront, but you'd already done half of the work on yourself, so then it meant that you could give it out to others. So I just think, it's a fantastic story. I think you're an amazing inspiration. And I say that honestly from knowing you and from working with you. Highly, highly recommend Siobhan's work just to anyone that's listening. Women in particular that you focus on now. I just think that your story offers a genuine call for people to choose, to make that choice.
Thank you so much, Gemma. Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
I think in a way the biggest problem with the story is the stuff that comes before the birth of your son. And looking at my because I do my positive negative notes, and there's two sides of mostly below the line, which in my judgment is negative, with just an occasional flip above it. Now I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. Indeed, I think that the dilemma I have with this story is, there's so much before that birth about the negative trauma that it sort of unbalances the story and makes it very long. I don't quite know what to do about that. But the thing is, the reason I have the dilemma is because those two pages I've done of notes on the sort of dark the wasteland, the dark place, is actually really important, because that's where many people are. And in a conversation, when you're coaching, presumably you go, you're allowing that person the space to explore all of that.
Yeah.
Because that's where you're going. So it's not that it's unimportant. It's just how to really get this story
condensed.
I mean I mean it would benefit from being a shorter story in many ways, because opportunities to speak and write. I mean, obviously you can write a book, and that can be as long as you like. But opportunities to speak and so on, it's often 10 minutes or so, and honing that story down is I mean it's a great story, and when you get the opportunity to talk for half an hour or whatever, then obviously you can do that. But also one of the values of shortening the story, and a lot of experienced storytellers say this: the greatest skill a storyteller has is getting the story shorter. And working out what you can cut and what you can condense. And that's always a good exercise, because then you begin to see this is what's important. And certainly all that stuff around birthing and the way in which this new you sort of emerged, like I was going to say a caterpillar out of a chrysalis, and I thought, a ridiculous thing to say, a butterfly. That's right. So you got the caterpillar, the greedy caterpillar. Is it called the hungry caterpillar, isn't it? That, eating all this alcohol and drugs and stuff, and fast foods. Yeah, and then the birth and all of that, and that dark, empty loneliness, which could be the chrysalis, and then gradually this new creature, is that the right word? Emerges. And that means this is a story about hope, and it's how to infuse it with hope, so that people listening can say, yes, I want a slice of that. Where am I in this? Because when you're in the darkness, you really don't know where you are, and you might be very close to the light, but you don't know.
I think it is. I mean, have you told it shorter before, Siobhan?
Yeah. I'm sure I have. Yeah.
So I think that the one thing I was just going to mention, but we'll go on to the next part of the podcast straight after this, just in the interest of time. I loved the bit you were talking about at the beginning, because it wasn't all darkness. It was because you had your grandparents, and that was a really lovely part of the story, saying that you felt a lot of love and connection. And I wonder whether that could be, even brought back or something later on. That was the thread of how, part of how you were able to connect with yourself, that you had that steady grounding. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Do you want to speak on?
It's a tug of war, isn't it? They're different, because you had those two contrasting experiences, your grandparents and your mother, and it was pulling you in both directions. And and if you can get that tension into the story, that's great. That sense of Until you get to the point in the story when you're not going to be pulled in the negative direction anymore, because you've found the strength to pull and keep it on that side. It's that, but that gives it a dynamic, and there's an energy then in the story.
Right, so we're going on to the next part of the podcast, and thank you so much, Siobhan, for telling your story. It was amazing. I'm really pleased we spent that long on it, because I think it's a really important story. So if you're still with us now, we've got just a couple of things left, which is, first of all, I'm going to share a poem, and then Chris is going to do a story. So my poem is called Healing My Addictions, Part 1, Social Media. I want to be free. I want to know the truth. I want to end all suffering. I want to know you. My mind's a fog and I get confused, wanting to go online, wanting to use social media. Will it bring me what I want? Will it end the pain? A little bit of love or an ounce of fame? Is it worth it? I still want to share, let the people know I'm there, that they have something to relate to and someone who truly cares. But my mind goes into ego, wanting to be known. Look how great I am when I'm putting on a show. Oh, here we go. And so it goes on. I still want to dance, write and sing, share a song, who knows who it may help or the joy it will bring. But these urges are just too much, and it's getting like a bad crutch, and I can't seem to stop as the hours add up. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on the clock. Just one more hit, please, go on. What harm can it do? I'm just putting up that song, I'm just sharing my truth, I'm just connecting on a page, just watching a video, it calms my rage. It keeps on a lid, and I promise it's just a phase. I could stop if I wanted. I'm not an addict or a slave to a screen. What are you saying? I'm a queen. I'm just expressing myself. I'm just being myself. Yes, but where's your sovereignty? And who are you without it? And if you find it hard to stop, then are you really free? Can you take a look and see? Can you stop just for a day and go outside or play your piano just for you? I know it's hard to do when there's no one listening and there's no one watching you. When your mind's all you've got and your heart's put on the spot and all these untapped into emotions can seem quite a lot. I know. Take it slow. You'll get there with it. Next time, just think before you click and share. Pick up a pen and do some healing. Go for a walk, and if after that you're still having a feeling and it's a genuine urge and not an addictive splurge, then go ahead. Share.
Wow.
So yeah, that's
so beautiful, Jemma.
That's something I wrote when I was going through quite a heavy screen addiction, which I've been working on for 2 years now. So it was interesting you mentioned about the 18 months. Actually, it probably isn't 2 years yet. It's probably about 1.5 years. But I've finally got it down, and I do no device Sundays now. So that's really nice, and I just go out for walks. But I know it's something that we've talked about this, Siobhan, like about how, that it seems as if at the moment that's where the connection is. And I don't know if you've got any thoughts on how it's been for you.
I just think over lockdown, we've been, cooped up in our houses, our phones and our screens have become our connection to the outside world and to others. So, yeah, it's very easy to see how that addiction has come about because it's been a search for connection. So, yeah, I hear it and I understand it. And, I've even participated in that. So, but I think your awareness of it is so powerful, and just like the dialogue you have with yourself within that poem is just so beautiful. You know, you're showing awareness and you're shedding light on why you're doing it and the reasons why. And it's such a beautiful poem. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Chris, any thoughts?
I'm sure, yes. I think it is a the experience that most of us have been through of connecting mainly online, which is what we're doing now. I mean, clearly there's some positives and some negatives to this, and certainly we're not going to go back to how things were before the lockdown, partly because people have found that meeting online is actually, there are a lot of positives, like you don't have to travel. It often means that people who otherwise wouldn't be able to get together are able to get together, and certainly in terms of things like Zoom and Squadcast that we're using, it is a way of staying in touch. I mean, my friends in Norway, I'll mention in a few minutes. I'm meeting with them every month, which I wasn't doing before the lockdown. Because I was going to see them, pretty much once a year. So, and that's sort of replaced it. But it does mean that we see much more of one another. And several of my regular meetings have sort of improved online. So I think we're going to have that tension. I think in terms of addiction, which is what the poem's about, there was the parallel in Siobhan's story was the place that alcohol had in Siobhan's life, and how it was actually keeping her from, she said about that, that 7-month period before. I've forgotten what we called it now, that very significant change of orientation. But it was realizing the role that alcohol was actually playing in Siobhan's life, and we've all got things that we do so that we don't have to think about, all the pressures that's on us. But it's also another complication to all of this is that very often the things that we do as seeming distractions are also opportunities for our subconscious to work and generate new ideas. And particularly things like watching films online or on the television or whatever can be opportunities just for, it means that because your focus is elsewhere, your subconscious can work. So working out what's generative and what's actually holding you back is sometimes not easy.
No, I really struggled with it, like working out what was nourishing and what was generative, as you said, and what actually was a distraction. But I found just cutting down the hours really helpful, just because then it gave me that clarity, so that I'd know that I think the things that feel generative usually are the connections, like Zooms, but even just making sure that they keep to a certain time. So I'm only doing 1 or 2 a day rather than, 4 a day. And then that can drain, because it depends what kind of personality you are as well. But sometimes if I spend too long, even connecting can feel draining. So it's making sure that the connections are fairly short, but also, nourishing as well. So things that I feel I'm participating in, that's really good, because that gives you that creative outlet. And also making sure that there's something coming back as well. So yeah, I mean, it's all trial and error at the minute, but I do feel I've come to peace with it a lot more than I did before. So
I suppose it's imbalance. It's
Yeah.
imbalance, isn't it? It's just getting the balance right, which is harder than just giving up alcohol.
Exactly. But I'd read books on addiction, and one of them was called Quit Like a Woman, and it was about giving up alcohol. So that was interesting, but I just put the same techniques and also Recovery by Russell Brand, and I just use them for the same, for screen addiction, because they're always the same. The techniques, it's all about finding your true essence within, like what Siobhan talks about, because then when you're guided by that force of love, then you'll be led to things that are purposeful and meaningful, and if that is on the screen, then I'll be led to it. But it will. I don't believe that I would ever be led to self-destruction, which is what it felt like at some point. I was forgetting to eat. I wouldn't talk to people. It's because I'd just forget, because I was just so consumed with it, and I wasn't always creating either, because sometimes I just watch loads of videos on YouTube, and that's okay, but it's like it's just keeping it in balance again. So Chris has got a story as well. Would you like to tell your story, Chris?
I should tell my story. I wrote this story just a couple of months ago, and well, you'll see what it's about. Here we go. It's not often I bring something to birth. Superficially, it's because I'm a man, but also, almost as superficially, I tend to faff around a fair bit. But there's a more profound reason. Yesterday, over a Zoom conversation to Stavanger in Norway, I met my goddaughter S. We don't often get a chance to speak these days. We live in different countries for a start. She has a small son, and usually he's around, and so most of our meetings are involved conversations about flying dinosaurs and the like, although it might have been a dragon. But her son was off on some adventure, and so apart from her brother, we were alone and able to have an adult conversation. I've never been a parent, and so there are a few people I've known since they were a baby. My sister was a fashion designer, actually she still is, a maker at the time of children's clothes. I brought S a baby-sized outfit when she was a baby, and she showed her appreciation by throwing up all over it. It's these little pleasures we lifelong singles miss. I saw her every year as she grew up, and perhaps less so since she became an adult. And I want to say, because for me it is almost it's a unique relationship, but it isn't, is it? I'm the one that's odd. It's a relationship that all parents have naturally. Any road, she told me she's studying for a master's in community development, and after our conversation, she said she had a load of reading to do. She showed me the books she's reading, book after book. And I remarked that I don't think I've read so many books on the topic over 30 years as a development worker. Training in development work has always bothered me. It took me 20 years practice to learn the skill. Theory only takes you so far. Many of the tenets of formal development work actually don't work because communities display polymorphous perversity. People simply don't act as they should according to theory. The first sacrifice the development worker has to make is their ideals. Your role is to help locals make changes themselves. What if they want something you believe to be immoral? I mentioned Saul Alinsky, a development worker in the States in the 1970s. He believed the role of the development worker is to rub raw the sores of discontent. He called it organizing, and citizens organizing in the States has been incredibly successful. S wants to work with immigrants and has already encountered racism in the host communities. It is hard and unforgiving work. It is possible to make significant changes, but it takes time. It means putting your ideals to one side and listening and seeing the situation through the eyes of those who live there, building trust so that the hosts and immigrants together learn to trust each other and make changes for mutual benefit. Slowly, a place changes through people learning to work together. It's a long period of gestation, a barely noticeable birth. And then one day, I see her nurturing her own child and her own community.
Wow.
I love how everything kind of has fit together today. Often on the podcast, we have the person will tell their story, then I'll share something that's completely different, and then Chris will share something that's completely different. But today, it's almost like all the themes are matching, and I love that ending, Chris. Just I see her nurturing her own birth and the birth of a community, and yeah, it's so lovely. Siobhan, do you have any thoughts?
Yes,
Oh, go on.
Yeah, I thought it was such a beautiful story, and I think how you were saying about sometimes it's barely noticeable, there's this gestation period and then a quiet birth, and I think that's how life touches us sometimes. It's like we don't see it coming, and then it's just there in front of us, and it's like, wow. And it's that benefit of hindsight and looking back at the process where your learning comes from. But it's wonderful to look back and see what's come to fruition. So yeah.
Yes, and people often forget that dark places are dark, which means you can't see.
It goes to kind of this idea of, is the dark really dark? Meaning that in order to, this is just a question, I don't know the answer, but in order to have a birth, it has to be dark because the womb is dark, right? And then, am I right in saying there's no lights inside? But then again, I'm probably going too far into this, but it's also a place of nurturing and warmth and safety and love. And then once the baby comes out, then they often cry. So I suppose it's almost a contradiction of, yeah. Don't know if that
but we've heard today that birth itself can be traumatic, as well, and certainly in development work, it can be extremely painful. Getting there, I've been through that many times, one of the challenges for me, which doesn't really come out in this story, is that I am very introverted, and being a development worker meant I had to be out there in communities with people who were at the entire, completely opposite end of the scale, doing all sorts of crazy stuff that wasn't always particularly constructive. The conflict in community organisations is far more frequent than people would like to think. Put it that way. It can be very, very difficult, and it's not I've never seen it really potently reflected in textbooks. at all.
No, I mean, I don't know if Siobhan has any thoughts on that in terms of, we can have all these words around connection and love and caring for other people, but then sometimes in practice it can be hard, like Chris said, like there's conflicts, or people have different ideas. How do you regain connection or keep connection when there is difficult scenarios, people with mental health, etc.? I mean, obviously,
Wow.
that's a big question. I don't expect you to answer it fully, but just, you've had that in your own life. So have you got any thoughts for our listeners on that?
I think what's always beneficial in any times of like unrest or when there's not clarity is just trying to tune back into yourself and just really listen to what's there, within you. Personally, a practice that I do in that, if I've got a conflict, is I do higher self connection. So it's like a form of journaling where I'll allow what my higher self wants to say just to flow and see what's there. So it's kind of like listening to your inner voice and just giving your inner voice that space to express itself. And I think sometimes when you do that, you get some really good advice, some really good answers, and some clarity on, what the situation is and how you can proceed and how you can do so with love as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. And leading on from that, so you do workshops on these topics, on journaling, especially to help others connect to themselves. So do you have any information about how we can connect to you further in that way?
Yeah, so you can find me on Facebook. My page is called The Self Connection Coach. That's my main method of contact, or you could reach me through email, theselfconnectioncoach@gmail.com. I have got something upcoming with the Women's Wellbeing Network, and within that there will be journaling sessions and lots of other wellbeing facilitators coming in and sharing a little bit about what they do. So it's a support network for women to help them to find connection and be supported on their wellbeing journey. So it's very much just bringing it all together and having a place of connection and that kind of thing. So I will be posting more about that on my Facebook page on the Self Connection Coach. And also, if anybody wants to send me a friend request, my name's Siobhan Louise on Facebook, and you can, contact me there as well.
Yeah, thank you. And Chris, how can people contact you?
How can people go? Loads of ways. I mean, my links will be in the show notes. The things that I do regularly, obviously there's this podcast, but I also do Telling Stories, Making Business, and that's usually on the second and fourth Thursdays in the month at 2 p.m. And there's a link to the program for that, because occasionally I miss one of them for various reasons. We've got a couple of people lined up for May, and I'm looking for storytellers for June now. But it's an opportunity to hear a business person tell their story, and then to receive feedback, not just from me, but from other business people.
Yeah.
And both of you have done that. In fact, I've done it as well, so we've all done it. It was a bit strange when I did it, but there we go. But it does seem to be of value, and I've done. I've really got to count exactly how many I've done. I've got the record, so I've just got to go find the time to go back and fill in the ones that I haven't got on the website. Anyway, yes. So that's what I do. And Jemma.
Yep. So you can find me on Facebook and Instagram, Jemma Rosenthal, and then also Creative Hearts. And I do one-on-one sessions to help people with their creativity, and finding your voice sessions every 4th Friday of the month. That's group sessions, and you can also work with me one-on-one. And you can check out my songs and dances and poems on my Jemma Rosenthal.
Right. On your social media.
On my social media. Yes, I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn as well, but there's not as much on those ones at the minute. But I've been advised, because I'm becoming an author, apparently that's where the author things are. So, I mean, you can follow any of those. And yes, Siobhan, what was your book called again? Just to mention that as well.
Yeah, it's called Love Thy Body, Real Stories, Volume 1. So that's available on Amazon, and I'll send you the link for that if you want to pop it on here.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I'll be giving... Yeah, go on. I was just going to mention... I was going to mention that I'm going to be in a book as well, but I will be posting about that on my social medias.
Yeah.
So check that out.
Fear not, because next time we have a guest who helps people write books.
Okay.
So we'll be able to discuss stories in books and so on.
Yes, we will.
To our heart's content next time. But we better get on and finish this. Thank you very much, Siobhan. That's been a brilliant
Thank you so much.
session. And all sorts of issues are there, not just for us, but for our listeners to listen to. And now it's farewell from Jemma and from me, Chris Sissons, and you'll hear us next time.
Yeah, and you can catch up with the other podcasts that we've done as well. So make sure to go back. There's been quite a few episodes now and really good content. And thank you so much for staying with us till the end as well. Yep. All right. See you later.
Farewell.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.